the violins of autumn wound my heart with a monotonous languor.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Today at 1, we're live in Ukraine as Russia invades in a major military assault by land, sea and air.
It's now more than a month since the US Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan. China's ambassador to Australia also issued a blunt warning a few days ago that those who push for Taiwanese independence will be punished.
We're waiting for a peaceful reunification, but we cannot rule out other options.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore.
Welcome to Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight, the show where we speak to those on the front lines of defending democracy around the world. New episodes drop every Friday, and if you enjoy this program, then I do have one favour to ask of you. If you can think of just one other person who you think may enjoy it as well, may find value in it, a friend, colleague or family member, then share it with them and tell them why you like it. With your help, we can help get these vital stories out to more and more people. Also, don't forget to check out the rest of my work on the Dictators v Democrats YouTube and Substack channels. If you want to support my work, then paid subscribers to Substack and Patreon get access to Why We Fight 1 week early. With all of that said, let's find out why they fight. Welcome to this episode of Why We Fight. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Vegas, an American volunteer in Azov's International Battalion. Vegas, thank you very much for meeting with us.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So this is a question I ask of every foreign fighter in Ukraine. What drove you as an American to leave home and join Ukraine's fight? Was there a moment or an event that pushed you over that line?
Yeah, it was probably a culmination of events, but in the US, I was a firefighter and a medic, and I had a lot of training that the fire department had put me through, and it seemed like I was watching the news regarding Ukraine and watching Putin amass forces at the border, and I had a feeling he was going to go in. So right after the invasion, I started seeing all the strikes and civilian infrastructure, and I thought, I have so much training to help with search and rescue and help pull people out of buildings or help with medical. So that was my initial thought process. I have all this training, and it's a good cause. I believe in it, and I want to go help.
And what role, as much as you can say, what role do you do within Azov?
Yeah, so that's the funny thing. I never came to Ukraine. I didn't intentionally come here to join a military, but that's how it ended up, and that's how it's been for the last couple of years. And in Azov's International Battalion, I am we're calling an assault medic. We now put medics directly on the assault teams, the smaller teams, 4 to 6 man teams that will go on assault operations. And rather than having a medic back at the CCP, the casualty collection point, or the stab point, stabilization point, we have a medic that's fully CMC trained, fully combat medic, corpsman qualified, and with the actual assault team. So they're trained to be an assaulter. At the same time, they can do the more in-depth interventions medically if needed.
And to the best of your knowledge, is that different from how the British or American militaries would normally operate?
It's I think that's pretty much on par with how they're like smaller teams of Western militaries who are going to see combat. They're going into an operation. They know they're going to see combat. They always have, from my understanding, at least 1 or 2 CMC qualified soldiers. But in Ukraine, it's a little bit different. The medics are typically kept back from the direct fight, and then only called if they're needed.
So this represents perhaps a change in policy?
I I think so. I know Azov, they've been trying to model a lot of, for the past few years at least, been modeling a lot of their standard operating procedures and structures off of NATO and Western SOPs. And this to me is just another example of that.
Okay. I'll probably come back to that later, but on to sticking with your decision to come here.
Mm-hmm.
You said you're a firefighter in EMT. Did you have any military experience?
Right. Yeah. No, I had zero. We initially, when I was younger, I tried going into the Marine Corps right out of high school, and I was denied for some some medical disqualification regarding my left leg, I believe, like my ankle. It was very small, a very specific, I guess, design flaw. It was something I was born with that I never even knew. But they said it could be an issue in combat, so I wasn't able to go into the Marine Corps. Fast forward, years later, I was a firefighter, became a firefighter EMT, and always still kind of wanted that drive. I still had that drive to be a soldier. I think even subconsciously in the back of my head, but never had it officially until I came to Ukraine.
And how did your family and friends react when you told them that you were going?
There, there was definitely concern, but this is kind of on brand for me as far as doing something a little bit dangerous out of my comfort zone. It wasn't. I haven't been like a very by the book safe personality my whole life growing up, so it wasn't completely out of left field. For my family, they were like, "Oh, okay, that's awful," but we could kind of see that this was going to happen most likely.
And then when you became a soldier, rather than, you said you went initially to go do rescue work. And when you made the decision to become a soldier, what drove that?
Yeah, that's kind of when everything seemed to change for me. I I told myself wherever I was needed the most is where I would help. And after about 2 weeks of going around Ukraine, I went from Lviv to Kiev to Kharkiv. I even went to the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, and the U.S. Embassy told me to get out of Ukraine, and the other hospitals I went to in those major cities didn't know what to do with me, an English speaker. It was still relatively new to have foreigners in the country helping with that stuff, so nobody really knew what to do. Somebody led me to an organization called the International Legion, and I asked them where I could be most useful, and they said as a combat medic. And I said if that's where I'm needed. So that was kind of that's when I made the decision, okay, that's what they need the most. I can do that, or I can at least train for that and help in that capacity. Then when I got to the base and started training and I met all the guys, that's when I realized this is somewhere. Being a soldier is probably something that I want to do for a while, because you really create a bond and a brothership with the guys that you're with. And that was pretty big. That kept me there. That keeps me here to this day. So that was a big aspect of it.
And what was the training like for a non-military man?
It's the International Legion gets gets some different press here and there. There's some horror stories regarding the Legion, and there are some good things that they've absolutely done as well. But I suppose, kind of lucky. I was the third group of foreigners to, I suppose, graduate or come out of the International Legion. So it was still relatively new. We got a full 8 weeks of training. It was actually like 9.5. It was a little bit over. Um, it wasn't the most structured training, but considering the war had just kicked off not long ago and the International Legion was still very new, I could see past some things. And being able to still get 8 to 9 weeks of training for me, having no military experience in the past, was good. These days I hear people get much less training time, and then they're sent into the dangerous areas.
And onto the risk and potential sacrifice. Many people in the West, many people in the US could see this as not our war. And how do you explain to them why you've risked your life here?
It's a, it's a tough one. And sometimes it's one I still struggle with when I talk to people back in the US, because I think if I had not come to Ukraine when I did, I could have very well been one of those people talking about America first. It's not our war. That was kind of my mentality before any of this, even. So it definitely changed, obviously, for me. And the biggest thing for me, or that I try to explain to other people, is you've really got to look into it, dive into it, do your own research, because the media shows certain things, but they're definitely not showing everything. And there's what you see in the media, I don't think is enough to fully understand why somebody would want to come over here. But it's also the common denominator that I've seen between all the foreign fighters here is there's just a calling. They felt a calling, something in their gut, something telling them they need to go over here and do this. It's because it makes no sense logically. I mean, almost imminent injury, if not death. There's no reasoning or logical reason behind it, but there's definitely a calling, a gut feeling that seems like we all have.
And have you faced any criticism or anything from the authorities back home?
It's funny, actually. Since I've joined Azov, I have not been back home. But I had, when I was in the Legion, I did go back to the U.S. a couple of times to visit family. And every time I came back to the U.S., they did not give me a hard time. They did pull me aside, though, and they would ask me one question, typically, and it was, were you affiliated with Azov? That was their main concern when I would arrive to the airports, in the big airports in Dallas, Texas, and stuff. Um, and at the time, I didn't. I wasn't. I was just in the Legion, so I was able to say no and pretty much move on from there. But that was the big thing. I don't plan on going back to the U.S. Anytime soon, and if I do, it'll just be to visit family. But I'm not sure how that will look this time around.
And does that worry you?
For me, no. I picked up and moved everything this final time I came back to Ukraine. I sold everything in Texas. I brought my two cats with me from Texas all the way to Ukraine. These cats have seen more countries than most humans that I know. It's incredible. They've been on boats, trains, planes. It's pretty amazing. So I brought everything with me, and my plan is absolutely to stay here. But my family's still in the U.S., so I would like to see them. So it is a roadblock that I'd like to figure out. I do know a couple of guys who actually just recently went back to the States, California, and they weren't given much of a hassle at the airport. But I know it's different. It's different with different airports, different security, different organizations. So I guess we'll kind of see. But no, I'm not very concerned.
And onto your personal security, your personal safety, how do you personally cope with the danger and the potential cost of this decision?
I think for me, when I became a firefighter, you kind of come to terms with the fact that on one of those calls, it could be your last call. It could be a fire that you don't walk out of. So I was able to kind of come to terms with that possibility of death factor then. I also was able to come to terms with seeing death and being around death as a medic. So these aspects of it actually really helped when I came to Ukraine, because I knew the dangers of being in Ukraine. I knew the metrics and the statistics about foreign fighters in Ukraine. They weren't good. They're still not great. But because I had already kind of done that mental legwork to come to terms with the possibility of death, it was a little bit easier for me to kind of see past that, rather than somebody who has never been confronted with that daunting realization. And then now they're in a foreign country in the military trying to overcome that rather than something that I had already done. So for me, it wasn't that big of a leap.
And onto the sort of global stakes. This is a podcast that looks at the world.
Mm-hmm.
From your perspective on the front lines, often from stories I hear, that perspective narrows enormously. But here, speaking to me, to you, is this war simply about, is this war about Ukraine? Or is it part of a larger struggle between dictatorship and democracy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at least my answer to that is both, for sure. The guys on the ground, when I'm on an operation or a mission and we are working with other elements of Azov, the other battalions, 2nd Battalion, 5th Battalion, these are Ukrainian only battalion, or not only, but they're primarily Ukrainian battalions. And there's a common consensus across all of us that the immediate concern is Ukraine and the protection of its sovereignty, freedom, the people, the women, the children, the men. That is the most immediate threat and concern. When I step back and I come back and I'm no longer in a front position, I'm no longer out east, I'm in Western Ukraine, and I can kind of look back at the bigger picture, to me, it absolutely reflects on a global scale. If the fact that we have let this terrorist Putin walk into a free nation with very small consequences, with the exception of some sanctions for the last almost 4 years, that sets a very bad example, in my opinion, again, sets a very bad example in the eyes of people such as Kim Jong-un or China or Iran. It's not a good look for us.
Do you think the West really understands the scale of what's at stake here? I mean, we're speaking on the 10th of August. Trump's deadline came and went with not much of anything. And there's due to be a meeting with Putin. Things might have changed by the time this podcast gets released. But as the world is at the moment, do you think we understand?
No. I don't necessarily. It's the scale of the entire conflict is so downplayed in the media that it makes it hard to fully understand the global implications of this war. This is such a big conflict with such a large front line and battle zones and so many people being wounded and killed every day. This is even for me, the scale of this conflict, it boggles my mind. It's just very, very big. So I think I'm trying to figure out the best way to put this. It's it's tough because for me, living in Texas for a while and being an American, growing up with weapons and stuff, I was actually, believe it or not, a Trump supporter, and think my ideals changed a bit when I came to Ukraine. I saw how he treated the situation, how he treated Zelensky in the White House. So to me, it shows a really big disconnect from what at least America and America's presidential cabinet sees this conflict as. There's a huge disconnect. I do not think they fully understand what's happening here.
And do you have a message perhaps for the Trump administration from your perspective as an American, as a former Trump supporter, or maybe a current Trump supporter?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm big on America. I'm always have been, always will be. I'm American through and through. Just because I'm here in Ukraine, I get people who are like, "How about you fight for your own country?" Blah blah blah. I'm absolutely as patriotic as it comes. as they come. But with that said, I believe in a strong America, and an America that is feared in the sense that the bad actors in the world will not take a gamble and make really big bad decisions, such as a full-scale invasion into a free country. So I would love to see some really strong actions made by Trump. I think there should have been Westerner boots on the ground a long time ago. That's really unpopular opinion because nobody wants to see our troops get in any Western country, see their troops engage and possibly die in another foreign country. But to me, that would be the strongest show of force. Put Westerner boots on the ground, show our support for Ukraine, and show the world that evil like this is not going to be accepted. Yeah, that's it.
From your experience on the Zero and in an assault team, do you think Western troops with their current doctrines would stand much of a chance?
I do. I think there needs to be some standard operating procedure changes. There needs to be, some mission briefings, a lot of them to kind of explain, hey, this isn't Afghan anymore. You're not in Iran or Iraq. The enemy is not 4 kilometers away shooting an AK over their head at you. The enemy is about 3 feet away from you shooting an AK. So there's a lot of differences in that aspect. But from my experience working with other people in different militaries all over the country, they have the fundamentals of soldiering down. They have the discipline. They understand what they have to do. They understand that this is going to suck, but they have a job to do. So they have the fundamentals, the hard parts down. Now it's just a change of perspective on the conflict and a change in some engagement rules and, paying attention to drones rather than other stuff that soldiers are typically trained to look for. It's because the main threat is just drones.
And the other guys that you're with in the Azov's international battalion, from the other democracies, the Brits, maybe even the French, do they often share your motivations?
Yes. Yeah, actually. On my assault team is interesting. There was 3 Americans, there was a French, and our team leader was British. She spent 7 years in the British military. So we had a little diverse. Oh, and then one from Japan, which was way out, but he's awesome. So that's what made up our actual assault team. Very diverse, but everybody is very much bonded by the same ideals that I had mentioned. Everybody believes in what we have to do. They believe in the fight. We've seen Americans go to war and fight a war that when they come home, they don't even know what they were fighting for. Here in Ukraine, it's very, very clear cut. There's a very clear right and wrong here. I think that's another reason we get so many ex-Western militaries, because this is the war that they had initially signed up in their military to fight. This was the good versus evil that they wanted to fight. And now they're here. Now they have the chance to fight that. So yeah, there's a very common consensus across the board, not only in my assault team, but in our unit and in our battalion in general, of what we're here for and what needs to be done.
Now, you've been troops in contact with the Russians directly.
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen about their method of war? And I don't know if you've, spoken to any, captured any, how they fight and what their motivations are.
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's not portrayed very well either in the media. I think there's this common misconception that we're the orcs. That's what a lot of people call them, the Russians, the orcs. That they just come in hordes. They're untrained. They're conscripts. They're high on drugs, or they're wounded already. Which in certain areas, certain AOs, certain parts of the front line, that is how it is. But Russia has a lot of very well trained soldiers, and there was not once but twice that we had walked into ambushes, L-shaped ambushes by trained not even so I mean obviously soldiers, but I'd be willing to call them some recon unit or something a little bit more advanced in assault operations. These guys were wearing their ghillie suits. These guys had suppressors on their rifles. They were not your average conscripts. So, and this is 3.5 years into the war. So Russia definitely still has some really good fighting units out there that is not portrayed in the media. The only reason we walked out of either of those situations is because we had more machine guns than them, and we had a bunch of Americans who just like to shoot weapons, in all honesty. So we were able to put enough rounds just in their general direction to put their heads down, and everybody was able to escape for the most part. So this is I've been in positions where you could hear the Russians at night in their trench talking and laughing, and it was meters away, and you both know you're both there. But if either of you pop up, you would die. So the dynamic's really weird. I have seen some POWs, but the POWs don't really. The ones that I've ran into, they don't talk much. But there is a sense of that I can see a sense of relief, almost like they're grateful that nightmare is over. Their nightmare of being a Russian soldier, almost guaranteed to die in Ukraine. That nightmare is over for them. Now they're captured, and pretty much across the board, Ukraine takes care of the POWs pretty well, especially from what I've seen.
Yeah, well, they allow full Red Cross inspections and everything in line with the Geneva Conventions. Mm-hmm. The Russians, of course, do not do the same.
Right.
And how has being in contact affected your view of the Russian world, of the Russian system?
There's a mutual respect, I think, when you're on the ground on a mission, and there are Russians, there are the enemies nearby. There is a common a common energy or a common consensus that nobody really wants to be there. The Russians don't want to be there sitting in the cold trench. The Ukrainians don't want to be there sitting in the cold trench, and everybody's scared. So there's almost a common respect in that sense. Like, hey, we're all here doing this, and it sucks, and we're gonna probably start killing each other now or within the next couple of days. And you're sitting 30, 40 meters apart in a trench line. There's a respect there. There's also a respect that they just keep coming. They don't stop. It waves after waves, like they say in a lot of videos, or it may just be a wave of two Russians that'll come in, and then they'll get eliminated, and then they'll just keep coming, and the artillery keeps coming, and the drones keep coming. They do not stop. It's pretty incredible to be a part of. I've been in positions or in holes in the ground where we've been shelled like artillery and drones for over 24 hours nonstop, and you just sit there and think they had to have spent probably like $4 million just trying to kill me with this artillery. It's absurd how much they can throw at you.
And onto drones briefly. I mean, this is a subject that gets a lot of airtime. But you've been on the ground, you've been troops in contact, you work at the Zero, you're an assaulter. What is their effect? And from both ends, from you guys using them, my guys, etc., to the Russians.
Yeah, In 2023, when I was with the Legion, I was up in Kupiansk, and it was an intense area, intense. There was a lot of conflicts happening in that area, and drones were there, but they were nowhere near the threat that they are today. In 2023, there were some dropper drones. They drop a grenade on you. They weren't very accurate. It would honestly just be bad luck if one of them hit you. Now, these drones are, words won't even be able to do it justice, but they're at no point while you're on an operation, at no point are you not being watched by a drone. There's always drones in the sky. They're carouseling. So when they run out of battery, the Russians will send up another one. There's always eyes on you at all times, which means since there's always eyes on you, they can always call in artillery strikes. They can dispatch FPVs or mortars. So the only time they're not on you is when you're able to get into maybe a bunker or a house or something, but then they'll just stay there and watch until you leave. So it's not like you lost them. They just know you're sitting in there. That part for me is so much different. The element of a surprise is not a thing anymore in this conflict. You can't creep up like SEAL Team 6 and eliminate a bunch of the enemies because they've seen you coming for 10 kilometers already with their thermal drones. They're always up. They have, and there's drones that I've seen on this last deployment that I've had never even heard of and seen before. All kinds of things that are all just designed for the most part to kill you. These fixed wing drones, the FPVs are absurd. That was my first experience. This last deployment was my first experience with FPVs, and they definitely live up to their name as far as how frightening they are. They're very fast. They're scary. I tell everybody the number one threat on the front right now is drones. The number 2 and 3 threat are drones, and then the 4th and 5th are also drones. Almost every threat is drone related.
What can be done to counter them?
We were able to get some pretty good EW systems, and even portable ones that we could carry on operations with us that worked. They were the best working EW systems that I had seen personally while being in Ukraine. But with the AO that we were in, the Russians were primarily using fiber optic drones. So this huge box we're carrying on our back is completely null and void and unusable, and it's just dead weight. These fiber optic drones are now the problem, and we've tried shotguns, but the shotguns aren't as effective as people think. You need to have a specific load, specific kind of shotgun shell that is most effective at taking out drones, and those are hard to get your hands on. So what we've ended up coming down to is just shooting our assault rifles at them if they are coming in our direction. If enough of us shoot at them, one of us will at least clip it, so it'll change directions, hopefully hit a tree or something. But that's literally our only response to it right now, besides hiding, is shooting with our assault rifles.
I think that's going to be on the top of the R&D list for Skunk Works Down for the foreseeable.
Yes.
I want to ask about Azov. There's something I asked Knight as well, and something you brought up earlier. The only question that border security asked. It's often portrayed in certain ways from abroad, especially by the Russians, but we also see this in Western media as well. From inside the unit, what is the reality of Azov's role and values compared to its portrayals?
It's night and day different from how I had seen Azov in the past, because I am Jewish. My grandmother came from Poland, Polish Jew. She was actually put in one of Stalin's work camps in eastern Ukraine when she was trying to flee during World War II. So I have very Jewish blood, and this was definitely a concern of mine because I had heard the rumors as well, as far as white supremacy, Nazi, racist, all this, and I'm not going to be in a unit that condones that ever. Mm-hmm. And so I had to I made that clear to the commanders when I first joined in, and they wanted to start this, bringing in more internationals, and I was like, I need to learn more about this. Like, what's the deal? Why is there this stigma, this perception? And so I just learned about it. I dug in. I learned more about it. The Azov came from a group of hooligans, football hooligans, who were absolutely white supremacists. They were from my understanding, they were very racist. This was way back when they were still supporting, just doing football or soccer, football hooligan stuff. Eventually became a military unit to where the Ukrainian military recognized Azov. When the Ukrainian military and the nation recognized Azov as a military unit, this was all this whole ideology was removed from the unit. Now, you can't get rid of anything totally, I don't think. I'm sure somewhere in Azov you could still find somebody with these ideologies or these thoughts or these values, but by and large, from my experience, I mean, we've got Mexican dudes, black dudes, Asian dudes, you name it. I'm Jewish. I think Knight's Jewish. And we work side by side with the Ukrainian Azov soldiers, and none of them. There's no dislike or disdain towards us. Even the ones of different color, there is so much respect from the other Azov battalions towards us. Well, we've seen them. We've had guys injured in very dangerous areas, and these other Azov units will volunteer to go get our guys, and they're so dangerous. And they've lost limbs and almost their lives trying to save our guys who are black, Mexican, Asian. So when you see that, you realize, oh, okay, well, there's obviously not anything real like that, but or anything. There's no validity to these claims, as at least in the most fundamental parts of the unit, the soldiers on the ground. But initially, I just had to do a lot of my own research and talk to the commanders, and I was able to get a better understanding.
And talking about the Ukrainian fighters, how have they reacted to you being there as a foreign fighter? You ask a Ukrainian fighter why they're fighting, and the answer is simple: well, my house is 200 kilometers that way, and my wife lives in it. Mm-hmm. But for you, how do they react?
In my experience in Ukraine, any soldier I have worked with on the front has been extremely grateful and happy to see us. I have never met a soldier that was put off by seeing a foreigner. Now, maybe in your bigger cities, stuff like that, you may run into a Ukrainian or two who aren't super excited that there's foreigners there. That's kind of, I'm not positive about that part. Don't have as much experience with that, but as far as in the East, on the ground, boots on the ground, working with these Ukrainians, they are extremely grateful. And we had a couple of situations where there were some TDF, some territorial defense forces who were cut off in from our supply lines and logistics. They were stuck in an area because there was Russians on either side. So the Ukrainians were just dug in, and we showed up, and we walked past the Ukrainians in towards the Russians, and they watched us do this. And the way they looked at us was like, it was something I'll never forget. They were looking at us like superheroes or something. They're watching us walk towards the Russians to remove the threat so they could go and move and get back home. And we did. We did exactly that. We did our job. We removed the threat, and the TDF soldiers, about 14 of them, were able to now move they had spent 60 days on the position. They were now able to get through, get back to their base, and then actually shipped back to Western Ukraine and have some rest time. So only love and respect from the guys on the ground.
And have you built, bonds with the other internationals?
Yeah, absolutely. It's One of the questions I get most often these days is, why are you still there? Why are you still in Ukraine? Like, haven't you gotten what you came for? You're there, you're still alive. Why don't you cut out while you can? Blah, blah, blah. Those kinds of questions. My main answer, I wish I could say it was something heroic, like, because I will fight. I fight for freedom, and which is, maybe true, but I stay here for the guys. You build such a strong bond with the guys you train and fight with. You'll have this bond forever, for the rest of your lives, no matter how long that may be. And it's family. You train and you go on a mission with a guy that you've known for 3 months. All of a sudden, he becomes a closer friend to you than the friends that you've known for the last 20 years from school growing up. So I stay. One of the main reasons I stay is for the guys. And then also, of course, the main overarching reason is we're here to help protect Ukraine. But absolutely, that's one of my main reasons, because the bond that you end up growing with the foreign fighters.
And do you think this kind of, one day this war will come to an end, and there will be this core of foreign fighters who fought in Ukraine, who may return to their home countries, who may not, who may decide to make a life out there. And do you think this kind of international unity that you're describing is something that could shape how, especially the democracies, work together? Is this something that we could learn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the fact that even the International Legion early on, the fact that you could bring so many people from different nations, cultures, ethnicities, backgrounds together and fight under one flag together and communicate with each other without even speaking the same language and fighting a common enemy, I think that's incredible. And I give props to the International Legion for starting that, and any unit here in Ukraine now that accepts foreigners that is doing that. I think it's a really, really cool thing. And I do think a lot of people who come here to Ukraine do have good intentions, and they are here to help. And you have your bad apples here and there, like in any organization anywhere. But I think that this kind of a fighting force is huge. And I think it could definitely be used in all kinds of different aspects and capacities in different nations, or I don't know, really, really globally. I think the sky's the limit as far as we could do with a bunch of internationally well-trained soldiers, good and bad, theoretically.
And some reflections from your time, and how's being in this war, fighting for this country, fighting for its freedom, and definitely the freedom of Europe. How's it changed your understanding of what's worth fighting for?
Yeah, that's a great question. It gives you a lot of perspective. The life of an actual soldier, like a frontline soldier, is fairly simple. It's not easy by any means, but it's fairly simple. You have to focus on surviving. You have to focus on eating and sleeping and not dying. So in that aspect, it's simple, and you're forced to kind of refocus in on what's really important. What are you thinking about when you're in that trench getting shelled for hours on end? And those things you're thinking about are what is inherently most important to you. It's your family, it's your loved ones, it's your wife, girlfriend, whatever. So it forces you to get a better grasp on what's really important and a better perspective on what's really important. And war also has a funny way of separating the real from the fake. So if somebody has been a BSer their whole life, they're all talk, no action, that will come to light here. And vice versa. And you get a lot of authenticity out of people because combat forces it. You can't be a fake person in combat. It doesn't work. So there's a lot of realness, real emotion. And I think that's also another reason that the bonds are so strong as well.
And has this experience changed how you see your own country, the US?
It's changed it a lot, to be honest. I've traveled my fair share before I ever came to Ukraine, primarily in Europe, and there was a lot of things that I preferred about European countries over the U.S. But Ukraine, Ukraine has, in my opinion, some of those best parts about the things that I like about European countries: the cultures, the food, the people, the values. It has all of this, but also something that I used to love growing up in America was the patriotism. You know, we every morning we would say the Pledge of Allegiance, and you would put your hand over your heart and you would say the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. The things like this is how I grew up in the U.S. When the national anthem came on, you took off your hat and you put your hand over your heart. Here in Ukraine, there is so much patriotism still. When there's a funeral procession driving through the streets, people stop their cars, get out of their cars, and take a knee on the pavement, on the street.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, we've seen the videos, right? And to me, that is incredible. I love that. So that is something that I realized I missed about the U.S. For sure.
Do you feel that fighting in this war, fighting for Ukraine, is an act of patriotism as an American?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you bring that up. I do, and it's, in my opinion, it's the most pure form of Americanism, if you will. We were founded off this idea of fighting for our freedom. That's literally what Ukraine is doing. So, to me, it makes sense. This is very much American ideology and an American fight, if you will. It's not America's responsibility necessarily, but it's an American. I feel like Americans should feel this sense of responsibility almost, because of how important that we say freedom is and how we gained our independence and freedom. But we can't turn a blind eye when we see another country going through something very similar. So yes, absolutely. I think it definitely struck home. It struck a chord as an American, seeing somebody's freedom and rights just completely stepped on, like Russia has done to Ukraine.
And you've mentioned patriotism, and it's something I want to follow up on, because obviously Knight is British and I'm British, and our idea of patriotism is very different from an American idea of it. What is your idea of patriotism?
My idea of patriotism is loving your country and the people in your country. It's not about loving the government or the politicians or the people behind the scenes making decisions that do not benefit the people, but the actual people that you live with, you surround yourself with, the people you've grown up with, loving these people and loving the country that you grew up in with these people. That, to me, that's patriotism, and wanting to defend that culture, those values. It absolutely has nothing to do with government, president, any of that. I'm not a big fan of any of that stuff, but I do consider myself a patriot.
And in a democracy, you know, it is normal to criticize, you know, your country or your government's decisions.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that is patriotic?
How much is criticizing?
Yeah.
Well, to me, the power should always be to the people. And if the people are seeing these major policy changes in government and that politicians are making, if the people are seeing problems with this, one of the most American, I think, things you could do is basically put up a big stop sign or middle finger, if you will, and say, hey, no, us as the American people do not like that. This is what America is, us, the people. We don't like that policy that you're making that's supposed to be better for us. So standing up for those kinds of reasons, those rights, to me, is extremely American. I think what big government is doing currently is anti-American, if you will.
And I've always thought that one of the fundamental things of democracy is the right to give that middle finger and say, F you, I disagree, especially to a powerful person, be they government, be they a large corporation, whoever they might be. And when this war ends, it will one day, do you see yourself returning to the United States?
I don't. I don't. I've fallen in love so hard here in Ukraine, literally and metaphorically. With the people, the culture, the value. I think inherently in Eastern Ukraine, they have more conservative set of values typically. And that's just something that I seem to resonate more with. It's more about family first, and kind of you're not necessarily worried about a man/woman walking into the same bathroom as your 3-year-old daughter. I know it's a hot topic, which is interesting, but these kinds of things, they're not really a thing out here, at least not yet. And in the U.S., it seems like there's so much focus on those kinds of issues, but here, no. And that's just one example. But I feel, and it's interesting that I feel this way, but I do feel more at home in Ukraine than I do in the U.S. in its current state. I think in the U.S. 15 years ago, that would still feel like home. But how the U.S. now is no. Like in Texas, when I would go get my mail, that my mailbox was down the street, maybe 3 minutes, I would bring my pistol with me, because there's just so much crime and so much always happening. And that's here in Ukraine. You've got women who take walks at 2, 3 a.m. down to the little market to pick something up, and it's completely safe. That's unheard of in the U.S. You can't go walk at night.
It's kind of unheard of in Britain as well.
Right.
I was actually shocked and I committed a bit of a faux pas when the first time I went to Ukraine, when I asked I was on the train passing through Lviv. The train stops in Lviv for about 20 minutes. I wanted to step outside, get some fresh air. And I asked some Ukrainians just to watch my bags. Perfectly normal thing to do in Britain. And they looked at me like I'd pissed on their Doritos.
Yes.
and now I've gotten bad habits, and my partner keeps on shouting at me when I have my phone out in the street because I'm, texting someone, doing whatever. And she's like, Theo, your phone's going to get nicked. I'm like, oh, fuck. Because when I'm in Ukraine, none of that stuff's a worry. And it's completely different. And it's, law and order. I was speaking to another interviewee the other day, and he said, well, democracy needs the rule of law. You can't have a working democracy without it. And so, onto some of what you said. I mean, you and I are perhaps in different spectrums politically, but one of the things that Ukraine is fighting for is the right to disagree agreeably.
Yes.
And, hash it out, have a conversation. I'm not going to ask you about Ukrainian politics because you're a serving soldier and you wouldn't be able to answer those questions.
Right.
But I want to get onto some values and your values, and what, in the West, we see this in Europe and in the United States. It seems that people are beginning to lose sight of the value of democracy and of freedom to a certain extent. I mean, Europe polls actually pretty badly, especially among young people. France and Spain, only 50% say, oh, democracy's solid. Poland, it's even worse at 48. And in the US, we see rise of a lot of outwardly undemocratic, even sort of, to use, I guess, Platonic Republican thinking in certain sectors. And what do you have to say to those people?
That's a good question. I've thought about this a lot, actually. Kind of the idea of what went wrong. Like, where did things seem to go wrong from where I see Ukraine's in full scale war right now. Their capital is being attacked every night, and it's still safer. And I feel more comfortable in Ukraine than I do in the U.S. What went wrong? And I think what I'm hoping, at least, is the U.S. is still a baby when it comes to the timeline and how young they are as a country. I'm hoping these are growing pains. I'm hoping that some logic and rational thinking can work its way into the White House and into the political system in the next 15 to 20, 30 years. But with that said, for me, it just straight up is not a place I wanted to continue to live. And I realized that after visiting Ukraine for the first time. So my thought is, if you want, get out, or at the very least, experience other cultures so you know the difference. There's people who will live their entire life, not only in the US, but in the very same city that they were born in, and they'll hold the same perspectives and values their whole life, but they haven't seen anything else, or they have no other experience or frame of reference to anything else. So I think something that people can do to give them a better idea of what works and what doesn't work in different nations and policies is just traveling. See what you like, see what you vibe with more. Not saying come to Ukraine, but
well, you could. I mean, if you stick to Kyiv and Lviv, you'll be fine.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's very true. Again, it's absolutely safer than most downtown cities will be in the U.S. But I would say that I think these people have to make up their minds for themselves, and I think see the differences in different cultures in different countries, and they can really put a magnifying glass and see how much is wrong, what's going on in the U.S. right now.
And what do the words democracy and freedom mean to you, and what's their value?
I think these words are huge. People die for these words, and people live for these words. For me, it's freedom as such a grounded, like, I feel it to my core. When somebody says freedom or democracy, it's something that I feel like I really connect with. It's something I think is so important as a people in general. I even nowadays in the U.S., I see how people are in their day to day, and it doesn't quite look like freedom to me. Not as it should be. I think freedom is probably, I mean, it's up there with one of the most important topics ever, if not the most important topic. I also see and hear stories about Russia and how much of their media is scripted, and how much of it is filtered from seeing Western anything Western, really. It's such a controlled, unfair, unhealthy environment. And I think humans just respond or react better free. I think a lot of mistakes can happen as a free people, but that's how you learn, I think. It's huge. It's when I think synonymous America and freedom, maybe not anymore, but they were absolutely synonymous. Those words came together. Democracy, they came together. Things are a bit different now, but it's something that I will always hold near and dear forever.
And we see elements within the discourse in the West. And this is certainly an audience that I kind of want to reach with what you may be about to say. Both on the far right and on the far left tends to be the extremes who are actively supportive of Russia or China. And I want you to address especially the Americans who are supportive of Russia. What do you have to say to them?
I see a lot of this, and it's not only is it frustrating, but it's sad. It's sad to see. And I've racked my brain about it for a while, trying to figure out like who in the right mind could support a nation that has done some of the stuff that Russia has done. And I think it comes down to, like a lot of issues come down to, is education. These people are not, maybe they're not very educated in general, or they are, but they're just not educated about these specific topics and history regarding Russia and pretty much every one of its neighbors that it's invaded. It's when you look into the history, it doesn't take very long to realize, wow, okay, there's a very clear bad guy here. And these out basically all of Russia's neighbors, for the most part, are the victims. I think education and taking, but I think that goes along with a lot of stuff. People will believe a TikTok that they see before they will open up a web page and try to do some research on their own, or open up a book, or they'll just follow whoever they follow on social media and their viewpoints or whatever they're pushing on their channel that day or their page. I think it's a huge problem that I don't know how can be addressed necessarily without infringing on some kind of rights. I wouldn't want to be a politician necessarily trying to figure that one out, but it's scary to see. And I think if people could actually take the time, I know for a fact, if people came to Ukraine, their minds would change. Yeah. Of course, but nobody's going to do that. It's hard enough to have somebody just put down TikTok and open up try to find an somewhat unbiased web page about the history.
Man, if I could get the money together to put an organization that invites these people to Ukraine and then give them a goddamn tour, I would do that in a flash.
Absolutely.
And it also doesn't help that so many of these platforms, TikTok and Twitter, are owned by, TikTok's owned by the Chinese Communist Party through a number of intermediaries, and Twitter's owned by Elon fucking Musk. Yeah. Doesn't help.
Yeah, exactly.
One final question.
Oh.
Do you have a message for the dictators and the autocrats of the world?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can swear, because most people do.
Okay, fair enough. I've been holding back a little bit. There's so much that I could say, and there's so much, if not everything, that I disagree with from these dictators and just awful terrorist-minded people. But what it comes down to, in my opinion, is there will always be a group willing to stand up and fight for the good side, no matter what. And this group is always going to stand up and push against people like Putin. I don't see any reality, any future where in the long run, this kind of ideology wins as far as dictatorship or any kind of terroristic values or thought processes. I don't see that winning in the long run. I think people are typically trending to be good by nature, and there's always going to be people to stand up. And right now, we see that in Ukraine, especially in the foreign fighter community, people who just they see such an injustice happening, they come thousands of kilometers, thousands of miles away from their home to fight in a foreign country just because they see this injustice. We see this. People are willing to go through huge obstacles and roadblocks to get here to face this problem, and it'll just continue to happen. There's always going to be a group of people like this. That's it. It'll never be easy. It'll never be easy for these people to just walk, like he thought, Kyiv in 3 days, which he never said, right? He thought he'd walk over Ukraine, and what Ukraine has done in the past 3.5 years to supposedly the second most powerful superpower in the world has been incredible. In every aspect, I consider it a loss for Russia. In almost every metric except for land, I would consider it a loss for Russia. I think it's amazing, and Ukraine has showed a perfect example of what I'm talking about, standing up and being this voice for the rest of the world, saying, hey, this isn't going to fly. We stand up for this, and it's been amazing to watch.
Vegas, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Why We Fight. Thank you for listening, and always remember that democracy is non-negotiable. Before we finish, I do actually have a couple of questions that I want to sort of slot into the middle, which I've realized I forgot to go over. From your perspective on the zero line and as an assaulter, what is it that Ukraine needs from America, from the West?
Yes, that's big. Any kind of, ideally an answer to drones would be what would solve a lot of the issues. But aside from that, because we know that's not realistic, at least for the time being, more vehicles and more ways to protect these vehicles from drones. More ways to mask heat signatures through thermal imaging and night vision. More ways to. Everything I'm going to say has to do with drones because that is absolutely the biggest issue. So ways to hide and ways to fight drones and ways to protect against drones as far as armored vehicles. The tough thing is you can have the most armored vehicle in the world, but with enough drones, they'll just keep throwing them at you. So it's such a strange predicament. I don't know that it's tough, but yes, anything right now, for example, one of the main things we look at is how to get more gear to hide the guys' thermal cloaks, clothing, or uniforms with thermal lining in it. Anything that can help hide the guys from the drones, the ghillie suits, the leaf suits, all of it.
And is the West doing enough?
No, I don't. Well, objectively, no. And subjectively, no. I think so much more can be done. And I will say, when you are out there on fighting in the field, you're on the zero line or beyond, you feel very much like the underdog in this war. You may hear helicopters or tanks, different vehicles, and they're not friendly. You're very under. They have the advantage as far as technology, as far as numbers. You definitely feel like the underdog here, and in my opinion, we're just we're trying to hold the line as long as possible until we can get more and more support, until this realization of until these realizations make their way to Western leaders more accurately depicted, and they realize, oh wow, okay, they need a lot more help. Not necessarily funds, but just more weapons, more vehicles, more training. There's so many ways to do it, I think, and it's not enough so far.
There's some questions I'd love to ask, but I can't because I know you cannot answer them as a serving soldier, and perhaps for a later interview. But if a normal individual wanted to help Ukraine, what are their options? What would you recommend?
That's a good question. So I know I'm assuming what kind of questions that you are referring to, and I think there's definitely no question that there's some bad apples here in Ukraine at a level high enough to make some of this funding disappear. There's no question. With that said, if you are somebody who wants to support, I think actual physical products or items is probably ideal. And then you contact an organization that you know somebody in, whether it be Azov or if you know somebody in 3rd Assault Brigade or the Legion. You contact them and then you send it to them directly. So every avenue of this transaction, and there's no holes, and no holes where anything could go missing.
Brilliant. And if they're a military person and want to perhaps see if they can join the Azov International Battalion, how can they go about that?
Yes, it's actually our media team and marketing team are so good at Azov. You could just Google Azov International Battalion. Our website will be the first thing that pops up. Super simple application. It's like 3 or 4 questions. And then it goes straight to our recruitment team, and our recruiters will reach out typically within the hour. We have an awesome recruitment team too, who's very dedicated, and they're all foreigners, and they all speak fluent English, and they will answer all the questions regarding just there's so many questions when it comes to leaving your home to go to a different country who is at war, losing a war, and wanting to fight for that country. So it's Google Azov International, and the website will walk you through. It's very, very easy.
Vegas, thank you very much. That's it for this episode of Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight. What struck you most about their story? What surprised you? What did you disagree with? Feel free to let us know in the comments below and we can have a conversation. But if you enjoyed this work, if you made it to the end, then, well, I hope that you did. Please do like, share, and subscribe. With your help, we can grow this channel and we can get these voices out to more and more people. If you want to support my kind of work financially, then paid subscribers to Patreon or Substack get these episodes 1 week early. Again, that's on all podcast networks and on this YouTube channel. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and always remember, democracy is non-negotiable. Goodbye.